Well, welcome everybody. Just to let you know that the event is being live streamed and has been heavily amplified by Richard on all the RAP social media platforms. Good to see everybody. My name is Catherine Dixon. I currently work at Bain, but I'm about to take over as the CEO of the Regulatory Assistance Project. So it's sort of a semi in that capacity that I'm here. We're really happy to have this forum because 17.5% of GHGs, of course, come from the building sector. And for countries in colder climates, particularly in the global north, of course, heating can be a really significant part of emissions. So in the UK, for example, emissions from heating are similar from those in transport. Now, of course, decarbonising heating doesn't take any radically new technologies. We know what they are. It's primarily about growing existing markets for heat pumps and heat networks in more urban areas. And of course, the ripple effects from installing heat pumps go wider than transition. So, of course, really great for energy security, reduces the need for oil and gas imports. And because they extract the majority of heat they produce from the environment, they can really cut energy demand as well. And of course, that's going to be really important for managing power grids as we move towards net zero. And then the falling cost of renewable electricity makes cleaning up heating increasingly good value. But of course, doing all of that is really challenging because when we're talking about heating, we're talking about going into people's homes. That makes the policy conundrum particularly difficult. But it's not just a question for domestic policy. Also, international policy collaboration is also really important for heating, for sharing best practice, because change is needed really radically and rapidly in this sector. So we need to learn from places that have already deployed heat pumps and heat networks. So the event that we've got here, we're going to start off with a presentation from Dr. Richard Lowes, followed by a panel discussion. So Richard, before we go any further, maybe I can hand over to you and you can tell us everything you know about heat pump policy.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks very much to the panel for joining. Thanks also to the UK Pavilion for hosting us, and thanks to the audience for being here too. Just to say, we're going to have a presentation from me that won't last too long, followed by a panel discussion. There's two things that I want to talk about. One of them is something called the Clean Heat Forum, which some of you may have heard about, but maybe not. And the second thing is a new heat pump toolkit, a policy toolkit that we're releasing today at the Regulatory Assistance Project. But first of all, the Clean Heat Forum. The Clean Heat Forum is a global platform to share best practice on heating policy and technology development. It was launched in Glasgow at COP29 by the UK government, Scottish government, some other nations, and we RAP, the Regulatory Assistance Project, are a supporting partner of the Clean Heat Forum, and we run the Secretariat. It's one of the few transnational policy learning spaces, actually, and we're very proud of it. And we think it can become something quite important and powerful because we've seen some real backlash and conflict over heating policies in the past, and it's been a sort of useful space for governments and industry stakeholders to get together in a world where the technology is the same everywhere, but where there hasn't historically been that much collaboration. And so thanks to UK government and Scottish government for leading that, and to our partner E3G also for hosting the Secretariat with us. We have quarterly meetings of all members online. They're free to join. We also have government-to-government meetings, so that's a forum for governments to sort of thrash out some of the more challenging policy ideas. And it's situated within the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. They've got a pavilion not far away, but the Global ABC is a UNEP body which is set to transform the building sector. And within that, the Clean Heat Forum is trying to lead the charge on existing heating systems and the actual supply of heating. The Clean Heat Forum, finally, is a supporting initiative of the Breakthrough Agenda. So a buildings breakthrough was also launched a year or so ago, actually, after the original Breakthrough Agenda was launched. And the Clean Heat Forum is acting as the policy sharing partner as part of the buildings breakthrough. So please do join. Joining is free, more the merrier. There really is nothing to lose from joining. So just to introduce our new heat pump policy toolkit, this is an updated toolkit which comes after our first toolkit 2 years ago. which was the first of its kind, really. Heat pumps are an absolutely core technology for decarbonisation, and we recognised a need for policymakers around the world to get to grips with how they should best be supported. It's based on international research. We produced it with international partners, and really it shows that heat pumps, as well as being absolutely central, are deliverable. And we look at countries where they've been delivered at scale, particularly in the Nordics, but the US is a very good example, and we've got a representative from Carrier on the panel. In the US, heat pump sales are similar to boiler sales, they call them furnaces in the US, but we can deliver this. It's just a matter of getting the market right. And so the toolkit provides a guide for policymakers to try and get that market right. It should go without saying, but I'm not sure it does, that heat pumps are absolutely central to decarbonisation of buildings. There's no other technology that can remove emissions from a building like a heat pump, especially when there's an existing fossil fuel heating system. And the graphs there, they don't need explaining, but basically analysis by multiple independent organisations shows that heat pumps are expected to become the most important building technology for heating by 2050. And we see really, really rapid growth around the world expected, so that they're dominating in a position much more dominant than gas boilers are currently, actually. But policy attention is needed. So to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the IEA has produced numbers that show the rollout rates needed for heat pumps, and that on this graph is the red line at the top. Currently, we're off track. And there's it sounds terrifying when you say it out loud, there's a predicted gap in 2050 of 2,500 gigawatts of heat pumps. That's a lot of capacity of any technology, but that gap will grow bigger without action. And I think what we've seen in some countries where action has been delayed is that the gap is getting increasingly and worryingly large. And so the message here really is that early action is needed. But from a policy perspective, I'll just say a few things from the toolkit. What we need is coordinated policy packages that consider the economics and the pricing of heat pumps and heating systems, that consider support for building owners, because that's really important. This is really different from supporting, for example, at-scale offshore wind. This is about getting things into people's homes, often relatively high capital things too. And finally, there's a role for regulation. Regulation is undoubtedly the more challenging part of policy, but it is needed. End dates, the ending of sales of fossil fuel boilers are needed, and end dates can support that happening and give it a good indication to markets. So those three core elements of policy are required, but alongside those, they need to be coordinated very, very well and very, very smartly. So there is lots to do, but it's a very, very interesting area to work on, and we are seeing good practice in some places, and we're also seeing some places doing certain things better than others. So one really important one is the cost of electricity compared to fossil fuels. In some places, heat pumps cost significantly less to run than a fossil fuel boiler. And the chart there shows the ratio between gas prices and electricity prices. So places where it's blue or turquoise, it's cost effective already to run a heat pump. And that's a result of the pricing system for electricity, the market for electricity, but also things like incentives and levies on gas and oil supplies, gas supplies in this case. But then other places, the red or the yellows, it's more costly to run a heat pump, not necessarily more than the cost of a gas boiler. In the red areas it likely is actually. But often we find in those places that there are levies and taxes on electricity that aren't on fossil fuels. And it is as simple as that. There's just a market imbalance. And so this is a real key one, because you can't get people to switch to a new technology if it's going to push up their bills. I think that's straightforward for everyone to appreciate. So our policy toolkit, I'm not going to say much more about it. It provides detailed advice on all sorts of different technology options and policy options for heat pumps. So for example, we drill down into the different elements of policy support. I've shown the economics on the slide here, which we drill down to in more detail, but it really is a guide for policymakers to see what policies exist, how do they work, but also how to design them, because there are also different ways that you can do these things. Version 2 of the toolkit also includes a lot more technology detail, and it includes also detailed case studies from different geographies around the world. And that really grounds it really nicely in a sort of global perspective, but it also allows us to compare and contrast different countries, which works well with our work on the Clean Heat Forum. So, I don't think I've got much more to say. The toolkit can be accessed via this QR code. The link's on the slide too. it comes alongside a video series, so you can even share it with family and friends to get them interested in heat pumps if you want to. And I just want to say thank you to all of the partners. So we worked with Agora Energy Vendor, CLASP, who are experts on appliance standards, and GBPN, the Global Buildings Performance Networks. It really is a truly global collaboration of policy people, and we're very pleased to release it today.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. And I think, this the policy toolkit really is a tremendous piece of work, which I think shows the depth of the experience that you've generated over the last 14 years working on this subject, both in academia and at RAP, and in industry, actually. So thank you very much. So on to the panel then. So we've got three people who are very deeply involved in heat pumps in some way or other. Sorry. So we've got Jane Cohen, who's the Senior Program Manager for People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions at the International Energy Agency. We've got Corey Racald, who's the Senior Director of ESG at Carrier Global Corporation, based in Florida. And we've got Lee McDonough, who's the Director General for Net Zero Nuclear and International at the Department for Energy Security, and Emma Pinchbeck, of course, who's the Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee, the National Climate Advisor in the UK. So I think before we go into maybe some more detailed questions, it'd be good just to hear a couple of minutes from each of you on how important heat pumps are in your life or work. So maybe we can start from this end of the panel.
Is this okay? How important are heat pumps in my personal life? Well, clearly, I mean, and everything that you just presented on is obviously something that, as policymakers, and just before I was at the IEA, I was leading climate, energy, and environment policy for the state of New Jersey in the United States, and so this question of beneficial electrification of heat pumps was very germane to my kind of everyday life in terms of actual policy implementation. And I mean, heat pumps are for sure a huge part of the puzzle. But I think, something that I think is challenging, and I was actually surprised to hear you say that in the United States, heat pumps are on par with gas boilers. And I'm still kind of digesting that fact, because what I find is that in my personal life, when I talk to people about heat pumps, like, they really have no idea. And it's like just the technology itself is still really foreign to people. In fact, because it's late in the day and I'm tired, I'm going to overshare that I had this idea that nobody likes, but maybe somebody here will like, that we should do like a sitcom, like The Office, but instead of having it be like a paper company, it should be a heat pump company, because then people will it'll just get mainstreamed into, and like everybody hates that idea, but I think it's a good one, personally.
Don't listen to the critics, I say.
Right, I know. But I do think that there still is this big gap in understanding. And yes, it's also going into people's homes that makes it a policy intervention that's different than other ones that we talk about. And so I'm just going to make a quick pitch for really combining heat pump installation and other kind of energy efficiency improvements with other health and safety interventions in homes, like lead remediation, mold abatement, and kind of, if you're going into someone's house, let's do it all at the same time. Let's braid those resources together and be as effective and efficient as possible.
Great. Well, you heard it here first. We're going to have a sitcom by the IEA on heat pumps.
Thank you.
I love it. So
you're all invited to the Emmys when I win.
So Emma, and for the work of the Climate Change Committee, like how big a role does heating play for you?
Yeah, big. Hi. It's day 4. Which like everyone knows, and it's like day 4 of COP, so it's like day 100 in my brain of being in this building. And so apologies in advance. I'm very conscious Lee is next to me, who's the person in charge of actually delivering any of the mad stuff that I recommend, so going to make sure I get it right. I will try to. So in my personal, I'll tell you my personal life story about heat pump as well in a minute if we're doing oversharing. But in terms of the Climate Change Committee, if you don't know us, we're the independent advisory body to government on the UK's Climate Change Act and our carbon budgets, which are the kind of mechanism for delivering against our emissions reduction commitments and adaptation, actually. And maybe we'll talk about adaptation in a bit in this panel, but that means we were asked to do the modelling for the NDC and make a recommendation on it, which the government accepted. So if you've seen the 81% figure, that's what we do, and we do the equivalent domestically. So we have carbon budgets that fall around our international commitments too. And within that framework, so in order to deliver something on the trajectory of the NDC, by 2030, the run rate on installation for heat pumps basically needs to be the same level as a boiler replacement is today in the UK. And if you're not from the UK, though I imagine many of you are, you will know that 85% of UK households approximately, more or less, have individual gas boilers. So not only are we dependent on gas heating, we're all very used to having our own individual heating systems, to have like hot, wet systems which like feel very warm when you come into a room, where you have a dual fuel bill quite often, an electricity bill and a gas bill. There's a lot of like behaviour change required of the UK public in order to adopt these like technologies. And you're absolutely right, while they are established existing technology, one of our biggest barriers is that the public is like, oh, it's not familiar. And we need to get to the point where when you're thinking about replacing your boiler, you can have a heat pump. And that is the rough run rate. So it's about 10%-ish of UK households need to be adopting heat pumps every year out to 2030. And in terms of the carbon budgets overall, I would say that heat is the thing that worries me most, because of all those things I described about the UK market, but because also it's where our biggest gap is between recommendations and delivery. And it's seen as difficult politically to do. So as well as the make heat pumps sort of visible for people, I think we've got a job to do to make electricity cheap, and that's one of our big recommendations, both around the NDC and around the domestic carbon budget that support it. Make electricity cheap, because we will therefore benefit from the government's clean energy mission and all the new renewables that they're building, but also it will help stimulate demand and get electrification underway in the wider economy. And we're very clear as a Climate Change Committee that electrification is a really powerful tool. And you can make heat pumps cheap with government intervention and kind of, subsidies and designing markets. But I'm really interested, from my former job working in the energy sector, as well as my new job in the Climate Change Committee, about what people like energy suppliers or local plumbers or like the private sector can do to make heat pumps attractive with new tariffs and services, new ways of installation, new ways of making them familiar to people, to kind of put the ingenuity of the private market to work. So it's not just this thing where the public hears that we want you to have a heat pump, but we haven't got the compelling business offer to support it. So that's the view of like me personally from my experience in industry, but also the Committee on Climate Change on the science. And very lastly, I'm very interested in getting a heat pump. I'm really trying to get one for my new home. And I've moved to a house with I'm not joking, a 1976 gas boiler, because the gas heating system has, every time I turn it on, I think I'm like actually blowing the UK's carbon budget. So just as the chief executive of the CCC, it needs to change. I only moved in January. It's not my fault. I'm going to change that system. But I also have a son with asthma. And obviously for climate change reasons, we need to crack on with heat electrification. For the consumer, I think we have new tariffs and services and interesting things we can do with these technologies we can't do with gas. So it's good news if we get the business case right. But lastly, a really problematic source of indoor air pollution, the emissions in your home, which we, amongst other things, think are linked to increased rates of childhood asthma, is your gas boiler and your gas stove. And I think about that on a personal level. My young son is asthmatic. I'm asthmatic. I've got this boiler in my house that's probably contributing to his illness. And I think that is a personal motivator for helping get off old, dirty technologies and onto clean new ones too. There you go.
Well, that's a very powerful reason as well. And we look forward to COP next year when you tell us about your heat pump story, which could be an episode of the sitcom.
I think it's good news. We'll talk about it, but I think there's lots of people that are beginning to kind of want them in the UK. So, and mine's slightly complicated to install. So I've had my heat pump assessment. I've had the people around to do it. It's like I'm waiting for the installer to be booked in. So by next COP, I can come and tell you about my heat pump for sure. I promise.
We'll look forward to it. And Lee, how big heat pumps in your professional life?
I knew I should have sat Emma. She's basically said everything that I was going to say, which is good, because being aligned with your independent advisor...
I stayed off like the policy mechanisms for delivering it.
It's a great thing. So look, I think everybody said the same thing. Decarbonising heating in homes is one of the biggest challenges that we've got. I think Emma was right on the stats. I think 85% of homes are reliant on gas, and then there's oil on top of that as well. So, it's a significant challenge in the UK. And also our housing stock is pretty, sort of old, and that adds an additional level of challenge. But, just being really clear, it is a very important part of our overall net zero strategy, and it is a worry and a challenge because we are behind in terms of the level of rollout. And actually, I guess it's no point sort of repeating what everyone says, but I thought, the good news is, as set out earlier, we know about the technology, we know we can make it economically, attractive. So the big question is why is it not taking off? And I think several people have said it, but for me, the main issue is it impinges so much on people's lives. So far, in our decarbonisation journey, we've been decarbing the power sector and other bits that don't really touch people. So you can turn the light switch on. You can choose to think about the kind of electricity you're getting, but you don't have to. Whereas actually, we are asking people culturally in the UK to make a massive change. And I think we underestimate that at our peril. And then on top of that, I think some of the other factors that have sort of haven't helped is there's a huge amount of misinformation about heat pumps. Oh, you have to rip your whole house out and put this in, and you have to have underfloor heating, you have to have that, and it costs loads of money, and you have to have triple glazing, and some of those things are relevant, but I just think we have lost we haven't won the war in terms of communicating on this issue. So I agree with everything everyone said. The thing I would really focus on additionally is the communication piece. And then the other part of it for me that is a challenge is that because of that, the demand signal is not so strong, right? So and therefore the supply chain doesn't step up. So it's a sort of negative spiral you get into. And then when people do try to do it, the stories of difficulty with installation and expense and everything else, and that's the sort of negative sort of messaging that goes out. So I think the job we've got to do, and it's great to have the toolkits to try and demystify these kind of things, but I think we need to really win the sort of hearts and minds of people, and that is a really significant challenge that I think we've underestimated. So I won't repeat anything else. There's other points as well. I'm sure they'll come out in the comments, but I would say that's my additional points. Hearts and minds. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, and there really is a lot of misinformation about. And my own experience of installing one is that it really is misinformation. But the only thing you can't do is let your garden overgrow it, which I discovered is I have to keep on top of the garden to keep it working. But Corey, what's happening in your professional life in heat pumps? I guess you spend a lot of time on this.
Well, yes. So Carrier recently purchased Viessmann, which allowed us entry into the heat pump residential heating and cooling market in Europe. But taking a step back, we are an HVAC and transport refrigeration company. We have really transformed to become, our aspiration is to become the leader in intelligent climate and energy solutions. We're divesting our fire and security business and our commercial refrigeration just to really focused on HVAC and transport refrigeration solutions. And heat pumps are part of our sustainable solutions as we see our customers and really the world wanting to decarbonize. And the transition from boilers to heat pumps is really the way that we can serve our customers. And if you kind of want to take a step back as to why this matters, when you look at a building, about 40% of just the buildings in general, about 40% of energy consumption is associated with buildings. And then within a building, about 40% of a building's energy consumption sits with the equipment that we make with HVAC. And if you translate that into greenhouse gas emissions, roughly about 15% 15% of annual greenhouse gas emissions globally are associated with the HVAC industry. So that's why it's an important conversation to have today. So how are we enabling the clean energy transition? How are we enabling electrification? And it really comes down to affordability and creating that market. And I think important points were made here around providing education not only to the end consumer, but our direct customer who are installers and distributors, so that they have the confidence when they speak with a customer to be able to provide that business case to them. And apparently there's also an opportunity to have a sitcom of my office, so we can do that too.
Oh, wow, yeah, we've got a venue, we've got a customer, we've got everything. I'm so excited. Well, I'm glad you talked about the economics, and I can't resist the opportunity, because we've got the government and the independent climate advisor here, to ask the question.
It's not awkward.
It's not awkward at all. So, Emma, I'm going to ask you a little bit to set out what you'd like to see in terms of the, what kind of policy support is really needed to kind of shift the balance on the economics. And then Lee, we'll come to you afterwards. I know you're in the middle of a consultation, so you can't, be very specific about it, but I'd love to hear, a little bit on the issues at play, as part of that, and, when can we expect to see the results of the consultation, anything you can share on that. So first of all, over to you, Emma.
Oh yeah, so as an important distinction, we advise on policy, but only to the extent of checking that what we're recommending to government makes sense in terms of emissions reductions. And in order to do that, so that people don't go, how did you come up with that number? We have to kind of take a view on what's technologically and socially and economically possible. It's in the Climate Change Act that we do that. However, Lee is completely free to disagree, and the government and ministers are free to disagree. They would, I would hope, propose alternatives. But I think in the bucket of policies that we've looked at, upfront capital cost is an issue for customers relative to a gas boiler. A gas boiler in the UK is going to cost you, I'm going to look at Rich here, about £2,000-ish. That's ballpark for international audiences, £2,000. A heat pump, the costs have come down, but if you live in a kind of simple house and you can just put a relatively small size heat pump into your existing heating system, it's still going to cost you, it depends, but with the government's grant, you could get it for almost nothing or a few £100s, and the government's currently offering a grant of £7,000 to householders. But it could be considerably more than that, depending on the size of your house and your heat pump. And so the first thing that the government has done, and the thing that the Climate Change Committee has previously recommended, is you need some upfront support on the capital costs. And that in the UK means a government grant at the moment. What we've also said, though, is you hope to use the grant to scale the market and bring costs down. So I suppose in that package of measures, you're looking for work to support installers, to get the skills base going, to work out how to get installation cheaper. You would look to try and make electricity cheap. And in that package of measures, we propose moving the levies off electricity in the UK into either taxation or onto gas. And I will confess, Rich, I can't actually remember which one we said in carbon budgets, or if we took a view, but certainly we took a view on moving the levies off. And the reason for that, if you make electricity cheap, then you also get independent businesses able to make the business model work, to invest in installers and training, and invest in technology innovations to get the cost down, which helps you with the capital cost and kind of grows the market. So it's all about that bit of the market. The other bit of the problem is, how do you make them easy to install for people? And there we suggested some things like, there's a planning rule in the UK if you live, there's a historic planning rule that requires you to seek special planning permission if your heat pump is more than 1 metre from a boundary wall in the UK. There are, you can sometimes need to talk to your local network operator for installation. There's kind of like barriers in terms of like actually installing the thing, and we've obviously suggested removing those as well. And then I think, and this is important, on the other end of the system, we're also saying generate clean electricity because at low cost, so that you can then power your heat pump. So all of the things we're recommending on the energy supply side also matter. And to the government's credit, I think the new clean energy mission is about acknowledging that we need a lot of additional clean energy generation and clean electricity in order to electrify the economy. So there's a kind of series of measures. And I will say they're going all right. And I mean, we can have a conversation about what other measures we think we need, because I think we would say as a committee, we're clearly under delivering on heat. So what other things do we need? And would the government like us as the committee to look at advice on additional things that we can use to move the dial on heat? I think that's a sensible thing to ask.
Well, it's a comprehensive shopping list. Lee, what's...
Seriously, you need to come to me first. Like, honestly, literally. No, look, I mean, it's good again that, very much agree with everything Emma's said. And I mean, essentially, in terms of interventions, you have to address upfront costs, and you have to reduce the electricity costs, as Emma said, high electricity costs. So, there's lots of different ways you can do that. Emma's covered most of them, so I won't sort of repeat it. But just to sort of say, we have got quite a lot of specific interventions going on. I'm just checking the numbers here to make sure I don't tell you a false number. So, basically, it goes from everything like training the workforce so that, it's removing friction in the system, I guess, is, the other interventions we do. So how do you train enough heat pump installers? And we've got a grant there. So the heat training grants, I think they've done funded training for over 4,000 heat pump installers since last year. So these numbers start to make a difference, and we're going to be ramping that up. So there'll be 10,000 plus opportunities. These are really good, interventions that will see good jobs as well coming through. And then on the subsidies side, I mean, Emma's right, 7,500 for an air source heat pump and 5,000 for a ground source heat pump in terms of the support schemes. So, it's a significant chunk. And actually, we did see the previous governments upped the quantum of the grants, and we did see an uptick in terms of numbers of people applying for that. So you can see there is a direct correlation between how much you're prepared to subsidise and how you can shift the dial on the people who are willing to engage in this journey. I also think the supply chain point is quite important, and we do a lot of support to help the supply chain sort of get ready. So, and then the final point, I think, is still really super important, is what I said earlier. All of this doesn't really matter unless you get the clear messaging to consumers. And so, it's really vital that people feel confident and informed about that. So, look, very open. If Emma's got some other great rabbits, you can pull out the hats in terms of, additional interventions. But I feel a little bit as well, we just need to stick to the plan. I think the plan is sensible, and I think we know the component parts. So for me, it's doubling down on delivering the things we've got in place. And then if my Secretary of State was here, he often talks about sort of tipping points where, you move from one state to another because collectively the interventions you put in place have made it cheaper. And you can see that happening with EVs, for example. There's a crossover point where it will become cheaper to buy an EV than it is to buy a traditional petrol or diesel car. And so understanding, the sort of how these economic and support interventions add up, so you get to that point where it becomes a bit of a no-brainer, is one element. That doesn't do the hearts and minds, sorry to say it again, it doesn't do the hearts and minds things really, because that is still going to be a separate, I think, communication challenge.
Yeah, well, we know that technology transitions can go incredibly fast when they get going, when people get on side of them, and we know that from the mobile phone era, when I'm sure that people of my generation all said that we would never have one, and then within years we couldn't live without one. But what are we missing, do you think? Does any ideas on the kind of public communication side? Because I think there's a limit to what governments can do, and maybe there's more responsibility on independent voices, maybe civil society, Richard, in terms of trying to build this case, or maybe we need to think more creatively about making it exciting. I don't know about the sitcom, but maybe there is something in there.
We're all up for the sitcom. I think we've decided that's policy now. If you seventh carbon budget's due in next year, I might write, do a sitcom in. That's a joke. Please don't. Anyone who may or may not be watching this at home. I meant to mention there's the Hug a Heat Pump campaign. And we should embarrass Rich. Rich is one of the UK's great heat pump influencers, in which he's very happy to have his life invaded and show people how his heat pump works and how he's optimised it and how cost effective it is. And I think people who get them are often become quite they are evangelists for them. And there is a scheme run by Nesta, which is the kind of innovation research thing in government, it's definitely Friday, where they have got people that have got heat pumps to invite their neighbours in to show them their technology. It's called Hug a Heat Pump, and I think that's pretty good. I meant to add, because I could see Rich looking disappointed, that Lee and I are very aligned, because a lot of the policy we've recommended in the past has been accepted by government. There is a carbon budget due next year where we'll be offering new advice and to the government, and there are some things that may or may not be in that I can't talk to you, any of you, about yet. But just to flag decisions, things that we haven't talked about are things that are trickier. When you get down the decarbonisation curve into the late 2030s and 40s, if we do manage to get lots of people onto electric heat pumps, the decision for government will be like, what do we do with our existing gas grid, and when and where? And I'm not saying that is in the carbon budgets, but it would be something that at some point we'll have to think about as a policy lever. And the other thing no one said is we talked about retrofit, but in new build, when we're putting up new homes, we should just be electrifying those from the beginning rather than kind of adding to a problem on gas in the long run. So given as we haven't said those, those are two things where we are, TBD on policy and indeed on recommendations.
Just to add on that, when you think about the lifetime of a heat pump, it's about 15 years, which means we need to get to electrification and get to that by 2030, 2035, because what you have installed by then is going to get us to net zero by 2050. So it's not a 2050 problem. It's like now. So the idea of having incentives to support the market, to send those right market signals, are critically important. But of course, we would love not to have to depend on that. We want to get to that tipping point place where it's affordable for the masses, so that we've created that market and we've had that transition. But yeah, so just to kind of keep that in mind when we think 2050, it's down the road. It's really not when you think about the lifetime of the unit.
Thanks. Well, on the communication point, I think it's really interesting, and it's something that I'd like to delve into a lot more, actually, because we touch on it in the heat pump toolkit, actually, and there are some really good examples, and we talk about the Nesta approach, which is great, and you can go on the website, log in, and go and see your neighbour's heat pump, which is wonderful, right? And you get to go and see their decor and stuff like that too, which is fun. But there are other international examples where like social boards were used. So in the Nordics, it was social exchanging, because they went through this transition in Sweden in particular earliest, and they had to do something, and these social boards were used to share information, sort of like Reddit and posting sites where you can do that. And people shared their practice, and actually I spoke to a guy last week who runs UK Facebook group called Heat Pumps UK and Ireland. It's got something like 60,000 followers, and it's really good. You'd think it would be awful, and you think people would just be shouting at each other, but it's really, really useful. So I think there's some just basics that we can do, and there is some international best practice. But I do feel like the government government already does comms on heat pumps, and it shouldn't necessarily be coming from the government. That's the interesting thing, because there's all these questions around what information sources do you trust and so on. But there's always more that you could do, and thanks, Emma, for saying I'm a heat pump influencer. I find that quite embarrassing, actually, but I'm happy if it's inspired a few people to get a heat pump. Hey,
Thanks. Sorry, yeah, please come in.
Well, I was just going to add to that. I mean, I think heat pumps have now become politicized in a way, and I think we do run the risk, and we're already seeing this, that a lot of these clean energy interventions, whether it's heat pumps or electric vehicles, they've kind of fallen into the category of these are for rich people, who can afford them, and for everybody else, it's kind of like you can either get the crumbs or anyway, this doesn't have much to do with you. And so it is a multifold problem, because as long as the affordability is an issue, and I think looking at that map was interesting, because actually in a lot of places it's either at parity or it is more expensive still. And until that map is really changed, I think it's going to be hard, because for people to make the switch, it has for people who it's really not a problem financially. Okay, that's one thing. But for most of us, and then for people who are much more in lower income, like you have to make that extra effort to make the switch. And I think if you're kind of counting your pennies as you're doing it, it's going to be hard until we can really show the cost effectiveness kind of across the board. I think it's challenging. And right now we're in a political situation where we're seeing a lot of clean energy technologies being weaponized. And at the same time, we're wondering why people aren't adopting these technologies. And so I do think it almost takes, and this isn't just for heat pumps, this is clean energy in general, like a radical rethink of like what the branding of it is, because it's, we are seeing progress, but it's not landing as it sort of rationally should. But then when you look at the sort of political wins, you also do understand why. So I don't have an answer to your question really, except to say that I do think it's something, it is for multiple reasons really like a now problem, because we're a little bit in a hole and we're continuing to dig. And I would say like just in the US, you can see the discourse around like, we're taking your gas stove, or, you're losing all your choice. No one knows how to cook on induction. Like, you're seeing that narrative. And I think, we want to try to pull that back as much as possible, but it's going to take some real thinking on how.
Great. Well, I think those challenges I think have been just as prevalent in some EU countries as well.
For sure.
But certainly, like it's getting a very sharp debate in the US right now. And Corey, you operate obviously in the US, and are the policy mechanisms that we've talked about here the appropriate ones in the US? What do kind of US installers or industry want to see?
We want to continue to see incentives, of course. I think that's going to be critically important until we have scale. But I think and this is true for any type of incentive or subsidy, they need to be simple. We can't overcomplicate them, because that in and of itself becomes a barrier. And we hear that anecdotally from our distribution, where in some cases the grants or the incentive programs are so confusing to consumers and maybe even to the installers themselves that they don't want to bother. I mean, that's the worst place you want to be. So we want to make these incentives simple, easy to understand, not overly complicated, so that we can continue to have that adoption. And I had another point that I can't remember, but like that is at its essence what we're looking to do. Yeah.
Thank you. And perhaps we've talked a bit about the economics now, those policies, the comms. What about the supply side? We obviously hear a lot about the shortage of plumbers and HVAC engineers, and maybe Jane, you could talk a little bit to that issue. What are you seeing here?
Yeah, so we are seeing, first of all, kind of globally, we see energy efficiency as the biggest driver for employment in clean energy. So it's a place, across kind of energy efficiency interventions, where if we get it right, we're going to see a huge, huge job expansion. So that's just good in general. But in order to reach our net zero goals, we really need to ramp up energy efficiency now, including heat pump installation. But we're already in a deficit. So across the board, we're seeing shortages. So I have a UK example that my team gave me, so I hope this is okay to share. You guys can fact check me live. But in the UK government aims to deploy 600,000 heat pumps by 2028. But that will require a 10-fold increase of skilled workers available to install those heat pumps before the end of the decade. So that's a really significant increase, and we're seeing that everywhere. So energy efficiency employment has basically plateaued over the last year or two, but it needs to grow by about 4 million by 2030. So we really need to be thinking about our strategy. And it's for installation, it's for maintenance. I think there's a lot of not only do we need the workforce to be kind of trained on the technical side, but I think, as been mentioned, they have to be comfortable also talking about heat pumps and talking to consumers and it being something that installers are really comfortable with. Because what we've seen as well is that installers are not or HVAC technicians are not comfortable often talking about heat pump and installation, and so then the consumer isn't even thinking about it. So then the final point I'll add here is that it really is an opportunity for governments to capitalize on the opportunity of the clean energy transition to really have a great strategy on training up the energy efficiency workforce. There's jobs really kind of across the skill spectrum, so it can be a place for a lot of more entry level workers up to engineers and with kind of high education and degrees. So it's a really good place for government to create a lot of jobs and to bring a lot of economic growth.
So I agree with that. I mean, I guess the other thing we haven't mentioned, so I 100% agree on the energy efficiency side of things. And actually, this government under Ed Miliband now is leading on the sort of warm homes side of things. Big investment there, a really significant step up of that sort of components of what we're trying to do in relation to home heating, which has all those wider effects as well. And then I agree with you, the sort of scale of intervention in terms of the skills piece, but I don't think it's just for governments. That is the point I wanted to make. So actually, this government actually now is very clear. We set up Skills England. We've got the Office for Clean Energy Jobs, which is starting to look at this in a really a holistic way, I guess, and at scale. But my challenge is government won't do this on its own. So actually the key thing is to get the market functioning, because then if there's demands, the market will respond and they will provide the training and the investment from a business perspective, because they will want a share of the market. So I'm not saying government shouldn't intervene, and we are, but I think it's a partnership with the private sector as well, because fundamentally it's a win-win. They will be able to take the market share if they invest in the training, and I don't think it's just for governments to do.
Well, I hope, Emma, you're going to take your turn in echoing what Lee said.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, maybe that happened. I would say one of the things that I think about often, actually, because we talk about the workforce, it's not just a tenfold increase in the installer base. It's the installer base in the UK. This is an old statistic, but I think the proportions are similar. It's something like 80% of the installer workforce is over the age of 65 and beginning to think about retiring in the UK. And the reason I mention that is there is often, if you're coming to the end of your career, the incentive to retrain and redeploy and do something different is reduced. And a lot of the existing installer base who provide, they're often kind of like plumbers, they're providing other services in the economy. They're not just doing kind of heating systems. I think when I think about that and I think about the energy transition, if we don't offer the next generation interesting technologies to learn on and to train in, then it's unlikely we're going to have enough plumbers and heating engineers full stop, because no one goes into a profession thinking, I'm going to learn all these skills for a technology that everyone's telling me is not the future. And I would really love to see employers, organised labour, the unions who represent the existing installer workforce, government, Skills England, everyone coming together and thinking not just about retraining the existing installer base, but what the training programs are for the new generation of engineers coming in, bearing in mind that we probably won't attract them and keep them unless they get to work on technologies that have a 40, 50-year career ahead of them. And I think that is something that I'm very keen to think about more.
Great. And Corey, what's your experience of this? Because obviously you work in the industry, so
we do this. Okay. So
Hooray.
It's absolutely true what you've all said, that and this is not a carrier problem. This is an industry-wide problem where we're seeing technicians and installers hitting retirement age. We're seeing new types of jobs kind of becoming competitors. And we're also thinking about the job itself. It's a tough job. Every day, your location is different. The situation will be different. It's a physical job. And you're right, the skill set that was needed, 5 years ago is not the same skill set that you need today. So and on top of that, we're seeing incredible growth because we're having it coupled with the retirement plus the growth of AI and the demand for increased energy efficient HVAC units, which are they have more technology in them, and therefore you need to have higher skilled workers. So with all of this, we have created training centers. We created one in the UK, in fact. It's state of the art, where we bring in technicians and provide that hands-on training to them. Apprenticeship programs are really important for us. We have them around the world, where we partner with universities, and those technicians may not necessarily choose to work for Carrier. They can work for one of our competitors, but we are at least kind of, raising all boats here with this concept of having more technicians in the workforce. We all, like, if you talk to any of our competitors, we're all doing the same because it's really a need and a great opportunity for the trades. I think the trades, they offer economic, really an economic reality for many folks. It's just creating that excitement to enter the trades. And we did a lot. We're continuing to doing a lot to have that education to get individuals excited about the trades where they may not have thought of that before. And we're not just doing, we're talking about HVAC here, but in the other side of our business, with our transport refrigeration business, we're making investments as we're creating new markets in Africa to have training centers in partnership with the UN to train technicians locally, because it's all that same concept. We can bring these energy efficient technologies, but they have a long life, like I said, and they need to have technicians to continue to optimize the life of the unit so that we can continue to win in decarbonization.
So, as the chief heat pump influencer, what would you recommend we do to get more people into this business?
Thanks. Well, fundamentally, the most important people in this industry are the installers, and we shouldn't forget that. And they are the influencers themselves, actually. So it's the installers that often make the decision for households or building owners on the brand of heat pump or heating system and on the type of heating system. And it's not been unknown that installers have said to people, you shouldn't get a heat pump, because they've been told that by one of their brands that they use. Maybe it's a boiler manufacturer, for example. So I think, oops, that's the sound correct then. I think there's, from a comms perspective, I just think there's a really important missing link there. It goes back to the previous point. And the comms, from whoever it's from, the government needs to, or governments around the world actually need to think really carefully about how they communicate with installers, because they ultimately are the most powerful.
Did you want to say something else, Dean? Please do.
So let me just say that I really appreciate this panel, because I do think that we're saying like a lot of the same things. And I like that we have like government and industry and the nonprofit sector, everyone kind of working on this, and that we are seeing the kind of the same issues. And that kind of gives me some hope that we're working together on this. So I need to run, but thank you very much. And we've got some goals. We've got a heat pump installation. We've got a sitcom to write. So,
Yeah, we've got a big agenda for the next year. So please do, Jane, I know you've got to go for a dinner. But I'll just very quickly wrap up as you're exiting the building. So I think we've covered a wide range of the issues here. And yeah, as Jane says, huge alignment on, the policy mechanisms needed. I think, and some of the issues that we've really got to start grappling with on the comms side. So I think we'll look forward, over the next year to seeing how Emma's installation goes, how our chief heat pump influencer takes his work more viral, maybe on the installation side. And I think, a really clear agenda for us all to work on over the next period. Thank you very much. And Lee, thank you for being so candid about what the government's up to. We really appreciate you you participating in this as well. So thank you very much to the panel, and thanks for listening.